Aaron Franklin is the undisputed brisket champion of the world, and I'm obsessed with figuring out exactly how he cooks his amazing briskets at Franklin BBQ. I've explored barbecue conspiracy theories about whether he's using MSG, a special rub, butter blend, popcorn butter, brining, or seasoning sauce, and I've made some tasty briskets, but I haven't been able to confirm many of these theories. So in this video, I'm sticking to what I know from his books and interviews and his masterclass, and I'm going to break down a recipe so that you can replicate or come close to replicating a brisket at home that tastes similar to what they serve at Franklin BBQ. So let's get smoking. All right, first things first, starting with the meat itself. Aaron Franklin has said that he uses Creekstone Farms brisket, which is a super high grade premium Angus brisket that is prime or probably a little bit above prime. If you get a prime from the store, Creekstone Farms probably has a little bit more intramuscular marbling than that. So he uses very high quality, fatty, intramuscular fatty brisket. And that is what I'm trying to emulate today. However, because I live in Canada and I can't get Creekstone brisket in Canada, I'm using the highest grade that I can get, which is Canadian prime grade Angus beef brisket. I'm going to open it up and I'm going to trim it somewhat the way that Aaron Franklin does it, according to his book, A Meat Smoking Manifesto. I come in here and I just trim open this cryovac bag while taking a little bit of the flat off, because I was going to trim that flat off anyway. And now I can just pull the whole thing out. So according to Aaron Franklin's book, what he does is he comes in on the sides first and he kind of squares up the brisket. And I'm actually using a Franklin BBQ knife that I picked up from Franklin BBQ. And then we'll go to the other side and we'll square it up a little bit as well. And Aaron Franklin suggests carving that sheet of fat off, the hard fat, until you get about a 1/4 inch thick fat cap. So now there's this huge piece of flap here. Some people call it the mohawk. And Aaron Franklin suggests kind of trimming that off a little bit. So what I do is I come in and I just slice this whole thing off, slice that whole sucker off, get more of that seam fat exposed. If we leave a huge flap overhanging it, we're gonna get a ton of seam fat, and it's gonna be about 1 inch thick or wider between the point and the flat slice underneath it when you're slicing. So I like to be pretty aggressive and come in and take quite a bit of that point off. What it allows me to do is it lets me attack this seam fat in here that was previously hidden. So I can now come in and I can get rid of some of that seam fat and kind of come up at an angle. And now the last step that I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna round out any of the rough edges. And this is in Aaron Franklin's book as the last step. And you round out any edges that are not gonna be good when you slice into the brisket. If you think about it, he says in his book to slice the brisket right about here, right? Or here. So then you're gonna have your slices of the point come here, 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 here. If you have this large pointy thing on one slice, it's going to be kind of dry. So maybe you want to kind of visualize what it's going to do during the cook, and you decide that you want to kind of take that point off. And there we go. That is as good a job I can do with this. The supplier already scalped this area a little bit and took a little bit too much of the fat off. You can see a scalp here, scalp there. Not the best starting point for a brisket, but if you can get a nice even fat cap over the entire surface, at least on one side, without any scalp. And also, the only way that I really deviated from how Aaron Franklin trims his brisket in his book is that I took more of the point off just to expose this seam fat, this hard seam fat, and carve more of it out, so that when I cut here and take the flat away and then I take the point and make my slices, it's going to be a little bit better because the seam fat won't be so thick here, and this will act as kind of a fat cap for this area of the flat here. So that's what I do with my Angus briskets, because they tend to grow in a weird way that has a super thick seam fat, but your briskets might be a little bit different. Just use your judgment and you'll be fine. All right, now the next step is the rub. And what Aaron Franklin does, or what he says he does in his book and also in his masterclass, is he uses about a 1/4 cup of kosher salt. I believe he uses Morton's brand, and he uses a 1/4 cup of 16 mesh black pepper. So I've got that already mixed here. And what I did, this is a little bit of a pro tip, I put a little bit of vegetable oil in here, like a tiny amount, and then I shake it up really good. And that helps the grains of the salt and the pepper stick to each other better. And when you're applying it, they won't separate and you'll get a nice even spread of rub over the top and bottom. That's what they do for commercial rubs. If you read the ingredient bottle for any sort of rub that you have on your shelf right now, it'll probably contain some sort of oil as a binding agent to prevent the different particle sizes from separating. So try it out and let me know how it works out for you in the comment section below. It's something new that I've been trying out that's working for me. Okay, starting from the back of the brisket, Aaron Franklin says to use a loose wrist while you are applying the rub. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going in sort of a typewriter format, trying to apply the rub as evenly as possible. If you want the rub to stick better, you can use some sort of binding agent. I just use water most of the time, but this brisket is already pretty wet, so I'm not too concerned about it. So after that first layer is on, then I'm moving on to the sides. A little bit there, a little bit there, a little bit there. Now, once the back is done, I'm moving on to the second layer, which is the Franklin BBQ spice rub. Well, as of last year, that he currently uses on his brisket, probably as a finishing layer. I doubt he's only using this, but he did say in an interview with Daniel Vaughn in Texas Monthly that this is the rub that he's using on his brisket. I think that he's using some kind of mixture of a layer of pepper and salt, and then he layers this on, just like you would do that with Lowry's, for instance. He also has confirmed he's used Lowry's in the past, so if you want to use Lowry's instead of this stuff, it's probably going to have pretty similar flavor profile, but this is just a little bit more citrusy umami flavor from the tomato powder and the mushroom powder. But it also has celery seed and a lot of stuff that Lowry's seasoned salt already has in it. So you can substitute that. But I tell you guys in every video, try this stuff out, get it, buy it from Aaron Franklin. It's really good stuff. So now we're going to apply a layer of this, and I'm going pretty thick because I know from prior experience that the briskets at Franklin BBQ are very salty. So I'm trying to get a lot of salt on this brisket to emulate that flavor. Okay, I'm happy with that. So this is now gonna sit at room temperature for about an hour. Almost forgot to put my tinfoil hat on so Aaron Franklin can't read my thoughts while I'm talking to you guys. And while I'm doing that, I'm gonna move outside and I'm gonna light up the pit. I'm using my grill gun to light the firebox, and I'm using all wood for this cook because that's how Franklin BBQ does it. But if you want to burn charcoal plus wood because you have a smaller offset, that's totally okay. They also use post oak at Franklin BBQ, so if you want to be as authentic as possible, try to use that wood. But Aaron Franklin has said many times in the past to use the wood that is available to you in your area, so I'm using cherry wood for this cook. After the smoker comes up to temperature, I'm placing the brisket on the far left side of the smoker towards the stack with the point towards the firebox. I'm using a very large water pan to control temperature spikes in my smaller offset and to keep humidity in the cook chamber. In Aaron Franklin's book, Franklin BBQ, A Meat Smoking Manifesto, he says humidity is very important for brisket cooking. Now, I could let the brisket dry brine overnight or for 48 hours, and I've done a lot of experiments with dry brining and even wet brining for various amounts of time and with different amounts of salt. And what I found is that my favorite is wet brining for 10 days at a certain salinity level, and I've done some videos on that. But there's really no evidence that that is what Franklin BBQ does, so I'm not going to add it to this recipe. But if you want to try it out, I will link the video in the link above, and you can check out that video if you're interested in experimenting with wet or dry brining. Now I'm cooking at 250 to 275 degrees Fahrenheit for the first 5 hours. Now Aaron recommends in his masterclass to cook at 255 for the first 3 hours and then ramp up to 265, but I find that a little bit too complicated and too precise for a regular backyard cook. So I would recommend starting at 250 to 275 as long as you're within that temperature zone for the first 5 hours of the cook. That is a good target to hit. I'm checking the internal temperature at this point with my Tyco Insta probe, and it's reading around 140, and the brisket does look a little bit dry. So I'm going to spritz some of the dry areas with just some plain water. Now, Aaron Franklin does recommend spritzing of any dry areas on the brisket during the early stages of the cook. I would say from my experience, spritzing doesn't really do that much unless you're using some sort of flavored spritz like Worcestershire sauce or beef stock or pickle juice or apple cider vinegar or something like that. It can impart some extra layers of flavor. But beyond that, I find that the water that you spritz on the dry areas evaporates pretty much instantly after you close the lid, and it doesn't seem to do that much, but I guess it could slow down the cooking of those dry spots to let the rest of the brisket cook up. Maybe, I'm not sure, but Aaron Franklin does recommend doing this, so I'm going to include it in this recipe, but I'd say it's optional. Now, speaking of spritzing, I did an experiment where I spritzed the brisket and I also wrapped it at the wrap stage with this stuff called Golden Mountain seasoning. I had someone reach out to me and they said that a buddy of theirs had seen this product being used or at least present in one of the back areas of Franklin BBQ. So I thought, I wonder if this is being used on the brisket. So I spritzed the brisket with it and I wrapped the brisket with it, and it came out absolutely amazing. It was way better than without the Golden Mountain seasoning, and I would highly recommend trying this or some other kind of seasoning sauce on your brisket because it's absolutely amazing. But I'm not saying that Aaron Franklin uses this. It's total speculation and conjecture, and it's hearsay from a third party that I don't even know if it's credible or not, but it's a fun experiment. If you guys want to check that video out, I'll link a card on the screen right now so you can watch that video. Now at the 5-hour mark, I'm checking on the brisket and it's sweating out a lot of moisture now. It's probing at around 150 to 160 on average, so I know it's starting to enter the stall where it will sweat out a lot of moisture and evaporative cooling will slow down the cook. Because of all that evaporative cooling, we can safely bump temperatures up to between 275 to 300 degrees now. Now, Aaron recommends bumping temperatures up to 280 in his masterclass after 7 hours, but he also recommends in his book, A Meat Smoking Manifesto, to cook the brisket at 275. And he also says in his books that if you check the temperatures in his smokers in his restaurants at any given time, they'd probably be running at 285 at this stage of the cook. So I'm going to simplify this and just say you can bump the temperatures up at this point to between 275 to 300 and you will be good to go. And just to explain the general theory of this ramping of temperatures a little bit, the theory behind it is that once the brisket has slowly started to rise in temperature and it's sweating out a lot of moisture, the exterior of the brisket is not dry anymore, and there's a lot of evaporative cooling happening, it's better able to protect itself from the heat and not dry out. So you can safely ramp those temperatures up, cook the brisket faster without drying it out. And that is why Aaron Franklin gradually ramps his temperatures up over time as the cook progresses. Now at this point, I'd also start rotating my brisket every few hours to help it cook more evenly. It's especially important in a small backyard offset smoker to help the point and the flat finish at the same time and cook more evenly. But I'm not going to inject too much of my own sort of techniques and experience into this video. I'm going to stick with what Aaron Franklin does, and he teaches us to put the point towards the firebox. So that's what I'm going to recommend in this recipe. But if you guys want to check out some more information on spinning your briskets, or I guess rotating your briskets, then I'll link a video on the screen right now. Now jumping ahead to the 11-hour mark, I'm checking on the brisket and it's temping at around 180 to 190 in various areas. Now in Aaron's masterclass and his book, he recommends wrapping the brisket when the stall is over and the moisture stops pooling on top of the brisket, which typically happens at around 180 to 190 degrees Fahrenheit. In my experience, the brisket could stop pooling at 185, or it could go all the way up to 200 degrees plus in the early 200s before all that moisture is evaporated off. But also all of that moisture that's pooling later in the cook could just be rendered collagen, which is basically gelatin, or some rendered sugars from the rub or the meat itself, or just fat that's pooling. And that stuff's not going to evaporate off. It's kind of sticky and brown and it looks like water, but it's not. That stuff's not going anywhere. So if you get that situation where you've got this bald spot that just keeps on pumping out liquid fat and sugars and gelatin, don't worry about it too much. Just leave it. Try to dump off as much of the liquid as possible and just wrap it when it hits 185. 185 in most cases is going to be when a brisket is done the stall and it doesn't have a lot of extra moisture left, and it's the perfect time to wrap. Now I'm wrapping the brisket in butcher paper, and as for tallow, I'm putting some beef tallow underneath the brisket as I wrap it. Aaron never mentions anywhere that he uses it, but we're pretty certain that he does. See the description section below for my sources on this. I'd say it's confirmed, so it's part of this copycat recipe. As for other theories about stuff he's adding to his wrap and his tallow, I've tested Golden Mountain seasoning sauce, butter blend, I've tested clarified butter, I've tested popcorn butter and popcorn oil and various vegetable oils. And there's no confirmation, obviously, that Aaron Franklin is using any of this stuff. It could be completely crazy, but I did those experiments. If you guys want to check out the results, I'll link them on the screen. Now I'm going to continue cooking on the high side of 275 to 300, closer to 300 or just slightly above that. Aaron Franklin says you can safely ramp up the temperatures to around 290 after the brisket is protected by that wrap. So for this stage, I'd say aim for 300 and your brisket should be done pretty quickly. Now we're going to cook until the brisket feels done. And this is probably the hardest part. I'd say as a general rule, it will be done at around an internal temperature of 203 to 205 degrees Fahrenheit, but every brisket is different. When you pick it up, it should feel very flexible and kind of gelatinous when you push your fingers up into it. And when you probe into the areas of the brisket, they should have almost no resistance. The very middle of the brisket will probe very easily. The point will probe very easily. And sometimes the flat has a little bit of resistance. preference, but the flat is typically quite lean and it gets dried out earlier in the cook, so you might have more of a tough flat. But as long as the whole brisket isn't pulling as you pull the thermometer out, then you should be fine with the flat. And in any event, if there's any lingering toughness in the flat, the next stage, which is the long hold or the long rest, is going to take care of that. Speaking of the long hold, I am letting the brisket rest down to around 140 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. That takes about 2 hours. And after it's rested down to that temperature, I am moving it into my sous vide holding chest for 10 to 12 hours at a steady 150 degrees Fahrenheit. This is emulating what Aaron Franklin does at his restaurant. He cooks all of his briskets the night before, and then he holds them for service until the next day. And based on the timeline that he says in his book for when briskets are cooked and how long it takes them to cook and when service is the next day, I'm pretty sure that he's holding for at least 10 hours. So for this recipe, you can hold for 10 hours at 150 degrees Fahrenheit, and you should be getting a pretty similar result to what Aaron is doing at his restaurant. Now, personally, if I was cooking this brisket with my technique, I would go up to 190 internal. I wouldn't go above 200 because that's when the muscle fibers of the brisket start really getting denatured. They lose a lot of moisture. They start losing their beefy flavor. So I like to take it to 190 and then I hold it for a really long time at 150. I hold it for 15 to 20 hours. And so you're taking it off of the cooker when it's not really done, but that long hold for 15 to 20 hours is taking care of it. I'll link that video on the page right now if you guys want to see that technique. But for this recipe, we're cooking until it's probe tender and then we're holding for just 10 hours.
Now a word from our sponsors.
Before we get to the taste test, I'd like to mention the Tyco Instaprobe you've seen me use in this video. Tyco sponsored this video and sent me their new Instaprobe, and I'm really glad they did because I absolutely love this thing. It gives me super fast temperature readouts with a large auto on and off LED display, perfect for when I'm smoking briskets late into the evening, and it has a ton of great features like a rotatable probe and a magnet to stick to your smoker or your fridge. And most importantly to me, it's extremely accurate to within half a degree. I was skeptical about this claim, but I tested it in ice water and it was bang on right out of the box. Tyco also says it has a speed of less than 1 second, which I was also skeptical about, but I tested it and yes, it does indeed register a reading in less than 1 second, super fast. It also says it has an IP67 waterproof rating, so I tested that claim out by immersing the Instaprobe in water for 30 minutes, and when it came out, it worked absolutely fine with no errors or any visible damage or anything. It just worked perfectly. This was super impressive to me because often I have barbecue grease on my fingers or I immerse my temperature probes in water, and it's good to know that water won't damage this probe. So if you guys are looking for an extremely fast and accurate cutting-edge thermometer, then I highly recommend the Tyco Instaprobe. Click the link in the description section below and use the code there to get a special discount on your order. All right, let's get to the final taste test. Okay, brisket in the foil here. I'm just gonna take it out. That's the stuff that Daddy likes right there. Oh, baby. Look at how gelatinous that is. Look, I'll just drop it. Boo! Oop. And I just sprayed myself everywhere. Cool. Take that out, and I'm just gonna dump this on the board. This is exactly what they do at Franklin BBQ. They dump it on the board before they cut it so they can slather those slices in it. All right, now I'm just gonna flip this around. I'm going to cut it right about here. It's feeling really nice and tender. And now we're gonna start with the point. And I'll just soak that in tallow there. I'll give you guys a close-up here, because I know that's what you've been waiting for. Okay. Whoa, baby. That looks really good. I know I just slathered it in tallow, but you can see how juicy this brisket is. It looks amazing. Okay, now what I'm gonna do is I'll start on this side here, and I'll just slice off the burnt ends and just kind of cube those up and put those to the side. And I'll just start making slices. Probably about 1/4 inch or just a little bit thicker. You can kind of tell at this point that the point is coming apart quite easily, so I'll just make some thicker slices. But if it's a little bit tougher for you, then you can make smaller slices because it'll be more tender. And now we're gonna take one of these slices of the point, we're gonna put some board tallow on it, like this. I'll give you guys another close-up here. Woo. Look at that. That looks absolutely beautiful. It actually looks very similar to what I had at Franklin BBQ. I think the briskets that they cook with there are a little bit smaller. This is a little bit bigger of a point than I think they had there, but we'll pull this apart and we'll see how tender this is. Oh, it just comes apart so easily. Delicious. Let's take a bite. Perfectly cooked. Best bite of the brisket is the point, in my opinion. Absolutely delicious. And we will do some slices of the flat. So what I usually do is, these days, I kind of just take this very edge of the flat and I just slice it right off. Because it's usually pretty dry no matter what you do. And I'll just save that chunk for chili. Actually, this is pretty tender, but I'm going to put that in the chili anyway. Because I want to serve some primo slices to my fam jam. I don't want them thinking my brisket's dry. 1/4-inch slices of the flat, which actually is cooked pretty well. I don't think it's overcooked. Okay, let's take one of these pieces of the flat and we'll see if it pulls apart. Well, the seam fat obviously is going to pull apart, but oh yeah, that's amazing. It's a little bit of a tug. Actually, not that much. Let's see how it tastes. That's good. That's how I like it. Not too overcooked. It's not pot roasty. It's got a little bit of tug, but it still comes apart in your... And this is why I always screw up. I'm always trying to show a weird camera angle. I should change the way that my desk is set up because it's a lot easier to slice when it is perpendicular to you as opposed to parallel to you. So here is another slice of the flat. We'll see if it pulls apart. Pulls apart perfectly. Man. That's tasty. So that was an amazing brisket. Does it taste similar to what I experienced at Franklin BBQ? I would say a little bit. Yeah, it's getting closer because of the high quality of meat that I used with lots of intramuscular fat. That is definitely what I experienced at Franklin BBQ. But what I've learned throughout this entire process of experimenting and trying to find out the secret is that maybe there isn't a secret. Maybe it's just using high quality meat and high quality ingredients, salt and pepper, some other stuff that adds a little bit more flavor, but just using your skill and managing the fire properly and getting a good amount of smoke on the meat and following the techniques that I learned from Aaron Franklin and that I kind of replicated in this video, maybe that's the real secret. It's just nailing all the basics. And that's what Aaron Franklin's real barbecue secret is. He's just really, really good at every single thing that he does, and he keeps everything simple and he does it perfectly. And that's what results in his amazing brisket. But the one thing that I do know is that I've done a lot of things in my experimentation that I think improve the brisket. I like wet brining for 10 days at a low salinity level. I like the Golden Mountain seasoning sauce. I like mixing clarified butter in with my tallow. So I think it's time for me to maybe stop being a little bit too obsessed about Aaron Franklin and branch off and do my own thing and just really go towards what I like and enjoy in brisket and what I think that you guys will enjoy as well. So I think it's finally time for me to let go of this obsession and my mission to figure out and replicate exactly what Aaron Franklin does and really transform into somebody new. That's right, guys. I got a new haircut, I got suspenders, and I got a new shirt to visually show the transformation of my brand image and my mentality and the direction of my show going forward. No longer will I focus on riding the coattails of people like Aaron Franklin just for cheap views and associating myself with them for credibility. From now on, it's all original content. It's all stuff that I dream up, but I did just join the Texas Monthly Barbecue Club. And I've noticed that Daniel Vaughn has quite a few barbecue secrets, so maybe I'll do a couple videos on him exploring some barbecue conspiracy theories, but no, I need to concentrate on my own content. But maybe a couple videos on Daniel Vaughn and maybe a couple videos on Aaron Franklin, but mostly 90%, 80%, maybe 75% original content on this channel going forward. This year, I'm planning on doing a whole bunch more crazy experiments. I'll do barbecue recipes. I'll try to do a little bit more diverse content than just brisket. I'm gonna build my own smoker, which is gonna be awesome. I've also started working with Oklahoma Joe's a lot more, so I've got a lot of their products that I'll be testing out different experiments on. So I hope you guys are excited to join me on this journey, and if you haven't already, join my Patreon. It's in the description section below. You get instant access to me through a private Discord chat community. Bunch of barbecue nerds that all want to get better at barbecue on there, and we're all helping each other out. You can also follow me on Instagram. You can join the Facebook Barbecue Nerds Facebook group, or you can just like this video, leave a comment below, or subscribe. If you're not already, you should be subscribed. But anyway, I'll see you in the next video, guys, and happy smoking.